Look at this moment. This is the final moment of a killer. His name is Yostin Mosquera. Just moments before this, he had already killed 2 people. What you're seeing now is CCTV footage. A man struggling to carry a suitcase. He can barely lift it. He stops, he adjusts his grip, and then something catches the attention of a witness. Blood is dripping from the suitcase. The witness approaches him and asks a simple question.
The pedestrian crossing and puts it down sort of 3 yards from us. And my son, who's outgoing, said, "Wow, man, that's a very heavy suitcase. What you got in there, a body?"
What's happened here? The situation feels wrong, suspicious. The witness picks up his phone and calls 999.
Emergency location.
Clifton Suspension Bridge.
What's the emergency?
Right, we're going to need some police up here quite urgently, I think. We had a gentleman up here who was dragging a case behind him. The case, the wheels are broken and what have you. He says there's car parts and what have you. It's got to be funny, the case is broken and it looks like it's really heavy and there's blood coming out of it. The guy with the case has run off. We're now with the case, it's blood. We're convinced it's blood.
From that moment on, everything changes. By the time police arrive, the killer has fled the scene. But he doesn't escape. As he runs, a cyclist records him on video. A man fleeing with a suitcase. What was inside that suitcase would shock the entire country. 2 victims brutally killed. And when police finally arrest Yostin Mosquera, he reveals chilling details about the crime and how it was planned.
Move your legs out to the front. Sit up. At this time, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything but may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned, something you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand?
No. What?
You are currently under arrest for murder, okay?
What's your name, mate?
What?
What's your name? Nombre.
Jot.
Jot?
Yeah.
Dot or Joss?
Jot.
Surname? Jot what?
Jot. Mosquera.
Mosquera?
Yeah.
This is the Clifton Bridge suitcase murder, and this story begins with a suitcase. What initially looked like a disturbing disposal incident would soon unravel into one of the most calculated and deeply unsettling double murder cases the UK had seen in years. A case that began not in Bristol, but inside a quiet London flat, and ended with 2 lives destroyed, a shocking betrayal of trust, and questions that would take more than a year to fully answer in court. This case unfolds in 4 clear stages. First, we begin with what happened, the brutality of the crime and who the victims were as people, not just names in a headline. Then we move into how police uncovered the truth, step by step, from the bridge in Bristol to a flat in West London. After that, we examine the legal process, where every detail was tested in court. Motive, planning, intent, and responsibility. Finally, we look at the aftermath, how this case affected families, communities, and what it teaches us about trust, vulnerability, and awareness. This first part focuses on the victims and the violence that ended their lives, because without understanding who they were, it's impossible to understand the weight of what was done to them. Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth. Albert Alfonso was 62 years old. Paul Longworth was 71. They were a couple who had been together for nearly 2 decades, living in Shepherd's Bush, West London. Friends described them as deeply bonded. Not dramatic, not flashy, just steady and committed. They had built a quiet life together, centered around routine, familiarity, and mutual care. Albert was a retired swimming instructor. Paul was a former handyman. Neither lived a public-facing life. They were known locally as polite, private, and kind, the type of people who rarely drew attention to themselves. What mattered most to them was their home and each other. That home would later become the scene of their deaths, a trusted presence in their lives. In mid-2024, Albert and Paul allowed a man named Yostin Mosquera to stay with them. Mosquera was a Colombian national, significantly younger than both men. Albert had known him online for some time through fetish-based platforms and had previously traveled to Colombia to meet him. Over time, the relationship shifted from online contact to real-world support. Albert helped Mosquera financially. He paid for flights, He allowed him to stay in the London flat. He even arranged English lessons for him. Paul was not involved in that online relationship, but he accepted Mosquera's presence in their home. From the outside, it looked like generosity. From the inside, it would later be revealed as a fatal imbalance of trust and power. On July 8th, 2024, both men were killed inside their own home. Paul Longworth was attacked first. He was alone in the flat when Mosquera assaulted him. The attack was violent and sustained. Paul was struck repeatedly in the head with a blunt object, causing fatal injuries. Evidence later showed signs of a struggle. This was not quick, and it was not accidental. After Paul was killed, his body was hidden inside the flat. Hours later, Albert returned home. What happened next was even more disturbing.
In the evening of the 8th of June last year, Albert and Mosquera are seen returning to the Scots Road flat. Mosquera had killed once already and planned to kill again.
Albert was stabbed multiple times, suffering fatal wounds to his upper body and neck. The attack took place inside the same home he had opened to Mosquera, the same space where he believed he was safe. Both killings were intentional. Both were separate acts of violence, and both were followed by actions that showed the attacker did not panic, but instead took control of what came next.
This is the chilling aftermath.
This is awful.
Mosquera sang and danced before trying to access Albert's bank account online.
I think it's certainly up there as one of the most traumatic and shocking murders I've ever dealt with. I think the fact that it was committed during such an intimate moment between Albert and Yostin, and the fact that it was filmed so close up, it was a really harrowing watch.
After the killings, after Albert and Paul were dead, their bodies were dismembered. Some remains were stored inside a chest freezer within the flat. Others were packed into suitcases. This was not an attempt to flee in chaos. It was an attempt to manage the aftermath. 2 days later, those suitcases would appear hundreds of miles away on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Why this case is so disturbing this year? This case is not only about violence, it's about access. Mosquera was not a stranger who forced his way into a home. He was someone who had been welcomed inside, supported, housed, and trusted. The people who died were not reckless. They were kind, open, and believed in helping someone they thought they knew. That trust became the entry point for extreme violence. And the brutality that followed was not impulsive. It unfolded in stages, first one victim, then the other, then the deliberate handling of the aftermath. By the time police were alerted to the abandoned suitcases near the Clifton Suspension Bridge, officers already understood that this was not a routine incident. When the suitcases were opened, they contained human remains. Carefully packed, wrapped, and concealed, the discovery immediately triggered a major crime investigation involving Avon and Somerset police with support from specialist forensic teams.
So the discovery of human remains within 2 suitcases on the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol on Wednesday night has understandably caused shock and deep concern to our communities. Over the past 36 hours, significant progress has been made in the investigation, which up until now has been led by officers and staff from our major crime investigation team.
At that moment, investigators didn't yet know who the victims were, where the killings happened, or who was responsible. All they knew was that someone had transported human remains across cities and chosen one of the most visible landmarks in Bristol to dispose of them. That choice alone raised questions. Identifying the victims' forensic examination began immediately. Pathologists confirmed that the remains belonged to 2 adult males. The injuries showed signs of separate violent attacks, not a single event. One victim had suffered blunt force trauma while the other had been stabbed multiple times. DNA analysis, fingerprints, and missing persons databases were cross-referenced. Within days, investigators were able to identify the victims as Albert Alfonso, 62, and Paul Longworth, both residents of Shepherd's Bush, West London. Once the identities were confirmed, the investigation shifted focus. The key question now was simple but urgent. The London flat becomes a crime scene. Metropolitan police officers were dispatched to the victim's home in Shepherd's Bush. Inside the flat, they found immediate signs that something was wrong. There were visible bloodstains, disturbed furniture, and areas that appeared to have been cleaned deliberately. A chest freezer inside the property drew particular attention. When examined, it contained additional human remains. This confirmed what detectives already suspected. The murders had taken place inside the flat, and the Bristol discovery was only one part of a much larger crime. The flat was sealed and treated as a primary crime scene. Reconstructing the timeline. Investigators began reconstructing the victims' final days. They reviewed phone records, online activity, financial transactions, entry and exit times from the building, CCTV footage from nearby streets. It quickly became clear that Albert and Paul had not been seen or heard from since early July. At the same time, police noticed unusual activity linked to their accounts after their deaths. As detectives examined Albert's communications, one name appeared repeatedly: Yostin Mosquera. Mosquera had been staying in the flat at the time of the murders. Immigration records, travel data, and digital footprints showed that he had arrived in the UK shortly before the killings. CCTV footage from the building captured Mosquera entering and leaving the property alone after the time police believe the murders occurred. More importantly, CCTV from Bristol placed him near the Clifton Suspension Bridge, carrying the very suitcases later found abandoned. This was a critical breakthrough. For the first time, investigators had a suspect. A clear link between London and Bristol. Visual evidence connecting that suspect to the disposal of remains. Police began tracking Mosquera's movements across the country. They discovered that after leaving Bristol, he had returned to London briefly, then attempted to leave the UK. Border systems flagged his identity and alerts were issued to international authority. Within a short period, Mosquera was located and detained abroad. Extradition processes were initiated immediately.
I've got a hand, mate.
Go. Yeah. Say the words, I need secure. Stay down, dog. Yeah.
Oh my god. What happened?
Secure.
On your side, mate. What happened? Move your legs out to the front. Sit up.
At this time, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything but may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned, something you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand?
No. What?
You are currently under arrest for murder, okay?
What's your name, mate?
What?
What's your name? Nombre.
Jot.
Jot?
Yeah.
Jot or Joss?
Jot.
Surname? Jot what?
Jot. Mosquera.
Mosquera?
Yeah.
Mosquera was formally arrested and brought back to the UK under heavy police supervision. During questioning, he did not offer a coherent explanation for the deaths of Albert and Paul, the dismemberment of their bodies. Instead, investigators relied on evidence, and there was a lot of it. Mosquera was charged with 2 counts of murder, preventing the lawful burial of a body, fraud offenses connected to the victim's finances. By the time Yostin Mosquera was formally charged, the case against him was already extensive, but the legal process would prove that this was not a simple matter of evidence alone. It was about intent, planning, and motive, all of which needed to be established clearly and beyond doubt. The prosecution structured their case around 3 core pillars: sequence of violence, post-killing, conduct, motive, and planning. Each was presented methodically. 1. Sequence of violence. The prosecution explained that the 2 murders did not occur at the same time. Paul Longworth was killed first. Evidence showed blunt force trauma to the head consistent with repeated strikes. The nature of the injuries indicated sustained force rather than a single blow, pointing away from any claim of accident. Albert Alfonso was killed later. After returning home, he suffered multiple stab wounds, including to vital areas. The prosecution emphasized that this showed separate decision-making. Mosquera had time to stop after Paul's death, but chose not to. This separation in time was crucial. It demonstrated ongoing intent, not a momentary loss of control. 2. Actions after the killings. What followed the murders became one of the strongest parts of the prosecution's case. Instead of seeking help or fleeing immediately, Mosquera remained in the flat, dismembered the bodies, stored remains in a freezer, cleaned parts of the scene, packed remains into suitcases, transported them from London to Bristol. The prosecution argued that these steps required planning, composure, and physical effort, all incompatible with panic or diminished responsibility. 3. Digital and financial evidence. Digital forensic experts testified about Mosquera's online activity before and after the killings. This included attempts to access the victims' bank accounts, use of their devices and passwords, financial transactions initiated after their deaths. This evidence strengthened the prosecution's argument that financial gain played a role, even if it was not the sole motive. The defense did not deny that Mosquera was involved in the deaths. Instead, they attempted to shift the narrative around mental state and intent. Their argument centered on emotional dependency, psychological instability, claims that Mosquera felt controlled or exploited by Albert, suggestions of a sudden emotional break. They attempted to portray the killings as the result of overwhelming stress rather than premeditation. However, the prosecution systematically challenged this. Prosecutor rebuttal, prosecutors pointed out that emotional distress does not explain killing two people hours apart, dismembering bodies, cleaning a crime scene, transporting remains across cities, attempting financial fraud. Each action, they argued, required conscious choice. The court was reminded repeatedly that motive does not excuse method, and whatever Mosquera felt emotionally, his actions demonstrated awareness and control. Verdict and sentencing. After hearing all evidence, the jury returned a guilty verdict on both counts of murder. The court found that both killings were intentional. The actions afterward were deliberate attempts to conceal the crimes. Mosquera was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term reflecting the severity, brutality, and planning involved. The judge emphasized the abuse of trust, the vulnerability of the victims, the prolonged nature of the violence, the extreme disrespect shown to the dead. Additional sentences were imposed for preventing lawful burial and fraud offenses. Current case status. As of the trial's conclusion in 2025, Mosquera remains in custody, serving a life sentence. There are no indications of successful appeals at this stage. The convictions stand, and the case is considered legally closed, though it continues to be referenced in discussions around trust-based exploitation and violence within private spaces. By the time the court proceedings concluded, the legal chapter of this case had come to an end. But for the people connected to Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth, the impact was only beginning to settle in. What followed was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, heavy, and deeply personal. Public reaction and media response to the discovery of human remains near the Clifton Suspension Bridge initially drew widespread attention because of its shock value. But as details emerged, particularly the relationship between the victims and the man responsible, public discussion shifted. So this was no longer just a case about brutality. It became a case about trust, access, and how vulnerability can be exploited inside private spaces. Many people expressed disbelief that such extreme violence could unfold within what appeared to be a stable, long-term household. The fact that the perpetrator was not a stranger, but someone invited into the home, unsettled a lot of assumptions people hold about safety. For many, this case challenged the idea that danger always comes from outside. The family and community impact. Albert and Paul were not public figures. Their families did not seek the spotlight, and after the trial, they largely remained private. The men had opened their home in good faith. That choice cost them their lives. In the local community, neighbors spoke about how ordinary their routines had been, how nothing outwardly suggested the danger unfolding behind closed doors. That realization left a lasting impression. The importance of awareness when offering long-term accommodation or financial support. Law enforcement agencies also referenced the case internally as an example of how cross-city cooperation, digital forensics, and rapid information sharing can be critical in complex homicide investigation. Awareness, practical takeaways, human not fear-based. Here are a few grounded practical points. The kind you'd hear from a concerned friend, not a warning poster. Trust should grow slowly. Offering help is human, but long-term financial or housing support should come with clear boundaries and transparency. Pay attention to shifts in behavior. Sudden dependence, secrecy, or pressure to isolate from others can be warning signs. Shared living means shared awareness. If someone new enters a household, everyone involved should feel safe and informed, not uneasy or sidelined. Digital footprints matter. Many modern cases are solved because of online activity. Protecting personal devices, passwords, and finances is not paranoia, it's basic safety. None of these points guarantee safety, but awareness often buys time, and time can save lives. Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth were not reckless people. They were ordinary individuals who believed in helping someone they thought they knew. What happened to them reminds us that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and that trust deserves care and balance. Justice was delivered in court. But the real value of this case lies in what people take away from it, quietly, thoughtfully, and responsibly. If you found this case informative and believe stories like this matter, make sure to subscribe to the channel. These stories are told not for shock, but for understanding, and awareness only works when it's shared.